what better person we have this morning to discuss this than our first panelist who's sitting next to me, Frank Ricotta. Frank is the chief executive of BurstIQ, a company that provides end-to-end enablement of blockchain-based health applications and services. So Frank, most people know about blockchain in relation to bitcoins, and this is for me, for example, when I was asked to moderate this session, I started reading up, and I discovered that actually in my mind I had a big confusion, and I kind of equated blockchain with Bitcoin, which is difficult enough to understand, but at least you understand incentives as an economist in Bitcoin. So you understand also why each transaction needs to be verified, because you need to be sure that when somebody sells something that the money is actually there, that assets are transferred. You can see why people would be willing to invest time and energy, lots of energy physically, because they get money for it, and which they can subsequently spend. But for somebody who's not an expert, it's kind of hard to understand how this kind of applies to healthcare. So if you could now give us a little run-up what the big issues are, and tell us also about where the link to health is.
Sure.
As a kind of kickoff for our discussion.
Great.
So you
I think we have a few slides for this. So we're going to start out, what is blockchain? And again, for all of you blockchain experts, this is going to be a very basic primer, but for those of you who are not, I hope we take some of the mystery out of it. Did I hit the right button?
Not sure. Let's see.
There we go. So blockchain. Blockchain is a new class of technology. Everybody talks about it as the technology, but from the perspective of health, you really have to think about blockchain not just as a technology, but a way of doing things. And what exactly does it provide from a value proposition? You know, we talk about this notion of an immutable ledger, this record of debits and credits or transfers of assets. So there's proof and there's an accountability in it from the standpoint that a transaction did occur, and it's decentralized. So there's this liquidity from the aspect of the diversity and participation. So think about it from a bigger perspective of this broader concept of democratization, or moving the power back into the individual's hand or the person's hand from a health perspective. Okay, did I go back? Can we go forward? I'm hitting the wrong button.
I'll do it for you. It's this
You're
one.
doing the wrong button. So I'm a technologist and I can't understand the slide projection. I'm gonna actually skip that slide. So let's go to the next one. So three key elements within a blockchain framework. Technically, there's this notion of private key cryptography, a distributed network, and a shared incentive to support the transactions within the network. So from a cryptography perspective, cryptography creates a signature, or the way to identify a person or an entity on the network. You can identify it from a cryptographic key, although the person or the entity still remains anonymous. And we had a really great session on ID yesterday. This is the foundational point of ID, this unique signature, but then you add attributes to the signature to create a digital ID or a digital persona. In health, that's pretty important, not just for a financial transaction, but from the standpoint of if I'm in a hospital, I don't want somebody to give me the wrong medication, because I have the same name as someone else. And believe it or not, it happens quite often. So we have this notion called blockchain. So what's a block? So the block, at the core of a block, is a digital asset or a piece of digital property. We talk about it from the currency perspective, like a Bitcoin. That's a financial piece of digital property. There's an owner attribute using that cryptographic signature, so that person or entity owns that piece of property, and a timestamp of when they took possession of that property, as well as what that little tag there, previous hash, is who owned that piece of property before, or different kinds of assets in the transaction ledger. That's a block. Right? So when you think about it from a healthcare perspective, we're not talking about money or money equivalent, in terms of a currency like a Bitcoin. What we're talking about is data. And in health, data really is the currency that drives healthcare. You know, data about you, say your genome data about how your body's functioning, some of the follow-on tests in terms of proteomic type tests or cellular-based tests, and then how you're living. So think of all these great IoT devices now that tell you how you're functioning, or even other inputs about you. So it's data about you, how you're living. Everybody wants to own it. Companies are created every day to generate more data because they know it's extremely valuable. Researchers demand more because, in personal opinion, I think the major innovations in health will come from secondary research or data research, bench research. But yet we as individuals can't access it and don't necessarily understand everything in terms of how it impacts us from living our lives day in and day out. When we talk about blockchain, now I take a chain of these digital transactions and I put them together in this broader ledger. So that's the chain. So all these transactions go together in a way that is verifiable from a network perspective. And this, I'm using the currency example, even though I said in health it's data. So think of transferring data or providing permission to see a piece of data through the network. I create a block, I'm going to transfer it, say I want my doctor to see a piece of data. The network will validate that that's the case, and the transaction occurs in this shared environment. So the network that validates that it's an attested piece of data and that the data is transferred or accessible by the secondary party is performed by these nodes, and there's an economic incentive to do that. I'm going to skip that one. So the last thing from a blockchain perspective I want to talk about is the value-added services, which are smart contracts. Everybody's heard of this notion of smart contracts, where we're codifying a business relationship of some kind within a contract. So there's a triggering event that then would execute the premise of the contract. In the case of health, think about it from the perspective of consent. Consent's a big problem in health, and of course it can extend to just privacy. Think GDPR. I'm going to give you consent to see my data. The other aspect of smart contracts, in particular with health, is it's just not one owner of a piece of data. So your doctor may also own access to your lab results as part of your electronic medical records, but you may also want to carry it forward with you to maintain kind of that longitudinal view of your health and your health profile. In some of the previous sessions, they talked about kind of the notions of how you implement blockchain. Here are some examples in different industries and different use cases. Most of what you'll see from the standpoint of clinical or medical records will be a form of a private perspective. Although I think there are some techniques to address some of the inherent problems within kind of a pure blockchain framework. Because you think about it again, blockchain is an open ledger, so it's meant to read the entries in the ledger. But you don't want your health information out there permanently in a public ledger. So there's a lot of work in creating second and third layer protocols to deal with the notion of data itself, complex data structures. Again, you think about health, data is growing at 40% a year. We're at this convergent point of transitioning into personalized health services with the results of precision medicine tests, as I mentioned earlier, the results of all this IoT information, and of course machine intelligence in a way that changes the whole access element of health from I'm sick or I need a knee replacement to an everyday, all the time thing. And that's the inflection point. And when you talk about blockchain's impact on health, I think you have to look at it from one bigger perspective, and that being the standpoint of it's all about changing the access model of health and really addressing this whole notion of health equity and health distribution in terms of accessing health services, and doing so in a way that empowers the individual to own and control and understand and use their information to live a healthier life.
Great, thank you very much, Frank. I have a couple of follow-up questions here because I think you presented very nicely what the uses are and how it works at a high level, but I haven't quite understood yet who are then the verifiers, so the nodes in the blockchain in health. Who are these people? How do they get there? I mean, how do they get to be the nodes? And you said there's an incentive, a financial incentive. Sure. As I said before, in Bitcoin I see it, but where does the financial incentive come from for the nodes in health data and, as you say, the consent contracts and so on?
Well, I think we're in the early stages of implementing what would be blockchain solutions in the health space. And where you'll first see them applied in very specific use cases, say in a pharmaceutical supply chain or personal health records. And so the nodes that operate or underlie the transactional or managing the transactions and incentives, I believe will first be private nodes, established by a government or a company, and then the economic model will be built into the contract structure in terms of how much does it cost, or what the incentive on the monetary side would be to move a piece of data from A to B. In addition, I think there's a second level of incentives in terms of the value of the data itself. So think of data itself as a token, and it has value, and the transfer of that value or the use of that value is then compensated. So I may join a clinical trial and use my data. I may or may not be compensated for that, but it allows us to build those incentive mechanisms within the contract structures.
Okay. All right. So that means that it's specific types of people. It's not like the general public. It would be people who are more who have a strong interest in having access to that data, whether it's on the patient side, the provider side, the research side, or, as you say, governments.
Yeah, I think an individual will have the opportunity to monetize or gain value from their data in terms of even economic compensation. But the underlying network over time will become a public utility in many respects. So think of a cellular provider, a mobile provider, or an internet provider providing that basic infrastructure, and the data management being a second layer of services that has a governance structure associated with it in terms of policy within a given geographic region. So government policy or consortium policy within a specific set of health providers.
Okay, great. Thanks. Just for your information, we're a small crowd, so I would say if there are any kind of urgent questions people want to ask in terms of comprehension, I think you could raise your hands and just step in. Otherwise, we'll have a round of first discussions and then...
We wouldn't have many nodes or parties.
Well, I'll take it first cut. I believe it will, because health in and of itself, and I don't care if you're in a single payer system or not, the delivery of health is very fragmented in and of itself. So you have on one side very advanced clinical delivery, hospitals or your primary care. On the other side, you have a whole set of health and wellness services emerging. So in my personal view, I think you have to look at it from the standpoint of almost creating a personal chain for your own longitudinal health record that can overlay on a broader distributed network that people within the health economy begin to participate as nodes within the network. So yes, I do believe it'll be very distributed from the compute and storage perspective, but very personalized, because data will be really centered around you as a person.
Oh, yeah.
So my name is Sheikha. I'm a health entrepreneur and promoter based in Kuwait. So I've been working with people directly about how much they know about their information, of how much they own of their own data and how much they can comprehend this data. So my question is, so once we hopefully achieve all of this and allow people to own their data and see what their data means, do you think they're going to be able to comprehend that data?
Actually, we're going to get to that point a little bit later, because we have that on our agenda.